And what I'm picking up on is that Diddy is being alleged to have conducted these sex shows, and he invited guests who had the use of his mansions to be involved in an orgy as they saw fit. He also is alleged to have recorded this, and that's where we get to what we're looking at. Somebody important is being or was recorded on these devices, and somebody is being protected.
Yes, sir. That's the question that the algorithm want to know right now. Who and who are they protecting is definitely on the forefront of a lot of people's mind these days. But I want to jump into something. This most recent interview by Judge Joe Brown. Shout out to the guys at Hip Hop News Uncensored. I believe I'll make sure I drop a link to the whole interview in the description. But definitely check it out. But he lays out a lot of different views that people are having in regards to the Sean Combs, aka Diddy brother, look, whatever you want to call him, this trial. And he want in this interview, he's going to give his expert legal analysis on the outcome, but he's going to start it off with something very unique about what's missing out of the case and who's handling the case. And the interview's packed, so we're going to dive into this.
The Mann Act was designed to catch Jack Johnson, a black heavyweight champion of the world before World War I that could not be defeated by any great white hope. Jack Johnson had a white wife, and she had some friend girls that would travel around with her, and particularly in the South, a lot of white people found that very offensive. So they set up the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to develop a proposed law that became known as the Mann Act, and that was designed to get Jack Johnson. Now, understand, this was this man's lawful wife, but he was riding on a train across a corner of Georgia, let's say, on the way to a seaport and on the way to Europe. And because they weren't armed at the time, the FBI was accompanied by local law enforcement officers. And in Georgia, let's just say that 100 some years ago, they did not recognize interracial marriage. So Jack Johnson was arrested for transporting a woman, his wife, across interstate lines for illicit purposes. So there is no money necessity involved in this, but it is known as the Mann Act. I'm looking at the 14-page indictment right now.
So, peeps, that's the first question that Judge Joe Brown has with the 14-page indictment on Sean Combs is why isn't the Mann Act listed, given what we know it means? So, in this next clip I'm going to play, he goes on to criticize the wording of the indictment, and he leverages experience as a judge in what the verbiage is saying and also what it is alluding to at the end of the day. So let's check it out.
And it doesn't say Mann Act anywhere in there, where usually it would. It mentions the federal code section. I'm looking at the rest of the 14 pages, and I find it absolutely extraordinary because there are only 3 counts to this indictment. And ordinarily, in my experience, an indictment like this would read, between the dates of 2009 up until the return of the indictment, the defendant did unlawfully transport females across state lines for illicit purposes, and they'd leave it at that. You would be guessing what they were talking about. You'd have to file motions to get a more particular statement, and the feds would fight like hell to keep you from finding out the details so they could try you by ambush. For these 3 counts in the indictment, they went over and over a lot of things. Like, for example, each particular phase of this thing, they keep repeating all of the defendant's aliases. Their standard procedure is in the very first paragraph. The defendant, in this case, and they list his aliases hereinafter known as the defendant, referred to as the defendant, and they would just say defendant in each count where that was necessary instead of repeating all of this. 2,000 bottles of lubricant oil. What in the devil is that? That has no business in the indictment. You have other things in here. The IV, where the performers were given IV infusions to keep their energy up, I guess, because these things have gone on so long. Now, let's translate what they're talking about. They're talking about an accusation that they never did say, but it's inferred that Diddy was pimping an orgy that lasted a while, and he did this on a routine basis, and there were guests that they referred to in the indictment as numerous witnesses, and these guests were coming to a mansion where there were various sex acts going on in various parts of the mansion for purposes of inspiration. And the guests could join in or be inspired by what they were seeing. They even mentioned in here, which was just the scandalous superfluous in this indictment, that Diddy was masturbating during the course of some of these proceedings, which would that's surplus language. That's just trying to inflame. They referred to this thing where we saw on video him running out of the hotel room with a towel without giving any of the background behind it and assaulting this woman. And they referred to it, and that's for inflammatory purposes because that's just part of the pimp game. By the way, anybody's talking about, yeah, man, I'm pimping, man, you know.
All right, let me jump in right here because I want to say, Judge Joe Brown, and well, first of all, let me know what you think. Do you think Judge Joe Brown characterization of what P. Diddy activities is considered on point, meaning pimping? But also, do you think that his interpretation of what the government put inside of the documents, as far as the verbiage, do you think it was intended as such? Now, for me, I think it's obvious that we got the shock value out of hearing the indictment being read. Us reading it for ourselves and actually seeing it being read. I mean, when you put it together, I believe that they got what they wanted by putting this out there in the public. But let's jump back to it and let Joe Brown finish giving his take.
That's what it's about. It's a filthy game. I represented enough pimps to know what the game is. It's been a long time ago, but it's been the same since time immemorial. They do call prostitution the world's second oldest profession, and whatever the first oldest one was, whoever was doing whatever that was to earn the money to pay for the services of the second oldest profession. So it's been going on for a long time. It's nothing new. And what I'm picking up on is that Diddy is being alleged to have conducted these sex shows, and he invited guests who had the use of his mansions to be involved in an orgy as they saw fit. He also is alleged to have recorded this, and that's where we get to what we're looking at. Somebody important is being or was recorded on these devices, and somebody is being protected. Now, I noticed that Diddy, through his lawyer, has been in continuous contact with the feds for quite a few months. Back in March, he surrendered his passport. He returned to New York, where he did not live, and secured a residence so he could participate in the defense of the case, which is all that's required. He was supposed to have been apprised of when the indictment would be unsealed, and he would be required to report with his lawyer and surrender himself after making bond arrangements. And there was supposed to have been a discussion on how much the feds were going to recommend the bond be set at. They ambushed him and arrested him in a shopping center with some of his kinfolk, and now they want him kept incognito, not incognito, incommunicado, so he cannot talk to anyone.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me jump back in here one more time. All right, now, let me give you my little 2 cents on this. I think Judge Joe Brown is hitting on something quite interesting about putting him in what they call incommunicado, meaning he can't talk to nobody. So therefore, whatever was on them tapes, they saw it. I don't know if they was quick to do it, but I think once he decided to come talk to the feds, they went on ahead and jumped on it and went on ahead and snatched him up. And by doing that, whoever they had been watching that was on them tapes, they waiting on their response now, and they waiting to see how they're going to not respond, how they're going to react to the fact that we snatched them up a day early. So, more to follow, but let's jump back into this.
That's what the feds have been doing, and most recently involving these mortgage fraud situations, so that parties who could blow the whistle on other parties were not able to communicate with anyone, even their lawyers, but say once a week, so they could not tell what they knew. And that's what we have here. It is unusual for Homeland Security to be involved in these things, and there are some references in here that the offenses had an international impact, which brings in Homeland Security instead of leaving this up to the FBI, which is for domestic matters, ordinarily of this type of thing. And remember, the FBI was set up to go get Jack Johnson so they could set up and prosecute under what became the Mann Act. So this is the FBI's bailiwick. They were only present during the service of the search warrants. They weren't the primary parties. What that indicates to me, in my experience, is that somebody in the FBI was not deemed trustworthy and might give confidential information to somebody outside, which they didn't want, so they brought in Homeland Security. This is not ordinarily the type of thing that Homeland Security deals with. So you'll notice, too, that 2 of his mansions were searched. One was in California, fine. One was in Florida. The peculiar thing about the one in Florida is that on the same lot, Diddy had a second mansion, which was not searched. And what they seem to have gotten is a lot of recordings that they confiscated. Now, you might say that's evidence in the case, but the point of the exercise is that even though quite a few people are mentioned indirectly, only one person got indicted. In the federal practices, usually when you have months to investigate something, they indict everybody and they mention everybody, even if they are listed as an unindicted co-actor. They did not do that in this case, which is indicative of them trying to hide somebody's identity and protect some people.
Then let me jump back in here again. Now, what he just said was a mouthful. Not only he's alleging that there is dissension amongst the government investigation branch, or I guess would be Homeland Security and FBI, but the fact that there is possibly a person who's connected to the FBI that may have an incentive to warn anybody about the tapes, or warn anybody about the investigation. That's a lot. You know what I mean? That's a lot to digest. And so when you look at it in its totality, Judge Joe Brown just said a mouthful, but we're going to go ahead and jump back into this, and I'm going to try to shut up. But this is a good interview so far, so let's get back into it.
The other point is from what you can determine, most of this happened in Florida or California. Why no indictments returned there, and why did they pick New York? What they seem to have done is, considering the totality of the circumstances and the U.S. attorney involved, is they picked New York because it was particularly hostile to Donald Trump and particularly favorable to protecting anybody who is against Trump. So we're kind of put on clue as to who the rest of these unmentioned witnesses, meaning attendees at these events, happen to be. The other point I find interesting is they made a big to-do during the bond review situation that they had yesterday with the fact that he had 3 disassembled carbines and some loaded magazines. Now, everybody and his mama has stuff like that in Florida, since receiver groups, which is against the law. I think they picked New York so they could use the fact that he had 3 weapons, which, hell, everybody on my block has got 10 times more than that, as something condemning and touching on or giving semblance to some justification for not setting a bond or even allowing a bond. Now, they're going to go in front of a federal court today, I imagine, and if not, they'll probably go trot down to D.C., which is not that far from New York, and seek one of the appellate judges on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals to set a bond. They can pick anyone they want. The government can come back and demand a bigger hearing, and they'd probably have a 3-member panel that would be selected at random. But in any event, something stinks to high heavens with this whole case. Now, with that said, I'll pass the mic.
All right, Peace. Now, what you think about that piece right there? Do you think Judge Joe Brown is correct with his assessment on why they decided to move the trial to New York versus holding the trial in Florida, given the fact, as you've seen in the video, Florida is definitely dealing with some gun problems down there, and they are easy to come by, according to the sheriff. All right, now we're going to get into the next part of this interview, where Judge Joe Brown begins to explain give his take on the outcome of what the verdict is going to be for Sean Combs should this go to trial. And also he talks about one more thing about why the RICO is not listed in the indictment. I thought about this for a second, and I started to look at what was going on in Georgia, and he's going to mention that here. But it's not going well for these prosecutors when it comes to prosecuting somebody for RICO. So let's get into it and see what Judge Joe Brown has to say about the RICO and wrap it up with his thoughts.
And an inference that somehow or another this is organized crime, which is not the intent of RICO. By the way, they don't use the word RICO in the indictment, which ordinarily they would. And RICO is 54 years old. It was passed in 1970, and it was to deal with John Gotti type situation, gangsters, drug cartels, and that kind of situations. You see it being used or bastardized in Georgia to go after a teachers group, former president of the United States for engaging in political activity, and for proceeding against a rap group for having some disagreeable lyrics. So it's being corrupted. It's racketeering influenced, organized crime is what the thing stands for. RICO, racketeering or influenced criminal organizations. And they are pushing it for political purposes. Then there was, of course, the thing with the presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, out on the West Coast with George Soros, who was also hooked up with the Maryland thing, and One West Bank, along with Mnuchin, who was the CEO for that bank, and became part of the Obama administration, and for a year, the Trump administration for that matter. But as I look at it and read the indictments, it's nothing that I haven't run into before, representing a lot of pimps, prostitutes, and dancers. And it's just pimping and procuring. That's what they're talking about. And in this case, the purpose was to set up some freak parties, freak shows, orgies, where performances were being professionally put on in various places in a mansion while the rest of the folk could get their freak on. That's what you're looking at here.
Now you just heard the judge give a his legal analysis on it and try to put it into a simple way of looking at it, right? Prostitution, pimping, as he say. But there's still that lingering question that everybody has, and that's who is being protected. And I think Judge Joe Brown is definitely going to get back on this. So let's take a look at this last clip where Judge Joe Brown is going to just nail this, and he's going to make this point obvious by his words. So check this out.
That's not the important part.
Right.
That's well set up, the due process of law in the Bill of Rights and also in the 14th Amendment. He's got the right to due process, whether it's on a state level, which this is, federal level, which comes in under the Bill of Rights. What we're talking is, why is the U.S. government taking it upon itself to do what it's doing, where it becomes very obvious if you read between the lines, they're trying to protect somebody instead of prosecute them as co-actors in this mess, and why they're trying to do what they're doing to silence somebody who might expose who those protected people are. Keep the Epstein thing in mind. We know who was on the list of visitors to the island and who flew on the airplanes, because those things have been published. But this time, this close to this crucial November election, it strikes me that somebody does not want that to happen again. Mrs. Imhoff is married to a big-time Hollywood lawyer. Prior to 2014, when she married him, this big-time Jewish Hollywood lawyer who has a lot of clients in the communications industry, they were all on Kamala Harris's behind about her little goings-on. It stopped suddenly in 2014 when she married somebody who had a Hollywood inside. And you have to understand, who is this that's likely to be going to these parties, and who is it involved that it is an entertainer? Is there some kind of implication that would influence that person's campaign? And we already know what kind of freak she has already been. We look at Willie and Montel, and when she was at Howard, and some other things going on out there in California that are a bit wild. So this, remember, has been going on allegedly since 2009. Who is implicated in this? It's not Trump. This is brought to you by people who are very much against Trump and more likely to protect somebody else. I find it unprecedented that none of these witnesses are listed with the rest of the detail, which is not surprising in a federal case, since they try to obscure their witnesses. See, in a state case, every one of the 50 states, unless the prosecution can show the judge that some witness's life is in danger, they have to give the defense the list of witnesses, their contact information, and not only the ones they know about, the ones that they should have found out about in the exercise of what they call due diligence in an investigation. A state prosecution has to be transparent, but in the feds, they do it by ambush. So I'm particularly concerned about the input of all of these gory details in here, which are designed essentially to inflame the public. But you see, now you've got a situation where subtly and perhaps loudly they've tainted any New York jury because they've been showing these film clips. So whatever the jurors told, unless there's an exceptionally able jury selection, you're going to get people in the yeah, I saw what he did, and you can hear it on some of social media. We had an egg space, Dana and I, the real Dana and I did last night, and there were some people that called in. They didn't care what the law was. He needed to go to jail because of the horrible things he did. But you see, that's not American law.
Right. All right, there it is, ladies and gentlemen. Judge Joe Brown and gave us a whole earful, a lot to digest there. But, like he said, it's the law. So tell me what you think. Do you agree or disagree with Judge Joe Brown's assessment of this whole Sean Diddy Combs, or Sean Combs as I would officially from now on refer to him, Sean Combs? Leave a comment below. Tell me what you agree or disagree with. Do you think there's more to it? Well, we definitely know there's more to it, but I want to hear from you. Now, go ahead and like, subscribe, and share. Turn on the notification bell when I drop these gems. Now, this your boy Mark on the mic, breaking down the stories behind the headlines. Until the next time, peace.